I still remember the day my spouse Dominic and I first set eyes on Greenwood Hills. It was an early autumn afternoon in the heart of the United States. A golden sun cast long shadows across manicured lawns, children rode bikes with bright helmets, and friendly dogs bounded after neon tennis balls. The houses ranged from quaint colonials with ivy-clad brick to modern ranch styles with sweeping glass windows. What struck me most was the gentle hum of conversation between neighbors, as if this place took pride in community bonding. It was precisely that sense of connection that prompted us to move here. My work had given me the privilege of traveling worldwide, from the vibrant markets of Marrakesh to the opera houses of Vienna. As an international cultural ambassador, I promote cross-cultural understanding through arts, music, and language initiatives. After years of near-constant globetrotting, Dominic and I sought a calmer place to raise our daughter, Ingrid, who was 12, and our son, Felix, who was 9. Greenwood Hills seemed perfect, friendly, structured, and brimming with culture and potential. We purchased a charming brick-and-stone house on Maplewood Drive. The day we moved in, neighbors in pairs and trios came by, introducing themselves, bearing pastries or potted plants, and warmly welcoming us. There was Mrs. Patterson from down the street, who crocheted baby blankets for local charities, Mr. Levi, a retired jazz musician, the Rutherfords, a young family whose 2 boys soon became friends with Felix. Everyone was polite and appeared genuinely thrilled to have us, particularly once they learned I was a cultural ambassador. But even on that first day, in the midst of such warm welcomes, I noticed a lone figure standing by the street corner, arms tightly folded, lips pursed, a woman with frosted blonde hair, well into her 50s, wearing a pristine button-down blouse with a large, glimmering HOA badge pinned to her lapel. Her posture conveyed an air of authority, if not outright hostility. She said nothing at first, simply observing us with hawk-like scrutiny, as if waiting for something. Anything she could correct or reprimand. Later, I would learn her name. Bernice Arkwood, though the neighborhood called her Karen behind her back. The moment she introduced herself, I realized that the dreaded moniker suited her all too well. When I approached with a friendly smile, she gave a brief nod and said, "Welcome to Greenwood Hills. I'm on the HOA board. Chairwoman, in fact." She spoke in clipped, precise sentences. Then, scanning the boxes on our porch, she added, "We have a strict set of guidelines. Make sure you read the packet in full, especially about yard maintenance, curb appeal, and architectural standards." I assured her we would. She barely concealed a look of skepticism. "We run a tight ship here," she declared. "I trust you'll keep that in mind." Without any pleasantries, she turned and strode away. Dominic arched his eyebrows at me. "Interesting welcome," he murmured, glancing at the others who had greeted us warmly moments before. I shrugged. "It's probably just an overzealous HOA chair. I'm sure once we follow the rules, everything will be fine." Little did I know at that time that Bernice Karen Arkwood would test my patience and the entire neighborhood's unity in ways I never could have imagined. A few weeks passed peacefully. Ingrid and Felix began classes at the local elementary and middle school, happily regaling us each evening with stories of new friends and adventures in after-school clubs. Dominic settled into a comfortable routine, overseeing his interior design practice from a home office. And I spent my time coordinating an upcoming international arts festival that was slated to visit several American cities, Greenwood Hills included, if all went according to plan. Among my top priorities was establishing a relationship with the Greenwood Hills Cultural Center, a modest yet beloved facility just a few blocks away from our home. This center had once been the seat of important community gatherings, folk music concerts, small art exhibitions, recitals by budding local pianists. More importantly, it was built on historic ground. Local historians claimed that, over a century ago, the site served as a refuge for immigrant artisans who had contributed to the city's architectural and artistic heritage. The center's original wooden beams, enormous windows, and artistic murals had been lovingly maintained for generations. That first afternoon I visited Ms. Geraldine Park, an elegant woman in her 70s who acted as the center's caretaker, toured me around. The interior smelled faintly of old books, turpentine, and the mild musk of time well spent. Every corner was lined with memorabilia, vintage photographs, tapestries from overseas, paintings donated by local families whose ancestors had come from all corners of the globe. Geraldine's eyes lit up when I told her about my background. "You must understand, dear," she said softly. "This center is more than just a building. It's a living testament to cultural pride and acceptance. Over the decades, Greenwood Hills has welcomed people from dozens of backgrounds: German, Vietnamese, Nigerian, Italian, Colombian. We like to think of the center as the heart of that diversity." Immediately, I envisioned a bright future for the place. As an international cultural ambassador, I often helped communities secure grants and organize events celebrating music, dance, cuisine, and art from around the world. We had a chance to put Greenwood Hills on the map as a shining example of intercultural unity. Yet, not everyone viewed the center so fondly, I soon discovered. Within days of my visit, rumors surfaced that the HOA considered the building unattractive and dilapidated. A portion of the membership, strongly influenced by none other than Karen, suggested that the old structure did not match the overall aesthetic of Greenwood Hills. Such remarks baffled me. The center was historically significant, well-kept, and quite charming. Why would they want it gone? I asked Geraldine about it, and she sighed. "It's been a source of tension for a while. Bernice Arkwood thinks it's crumbling and wants the land used for something else, perhaps another meticulously landscaped park or additional parking for new developments. She's determined to have it torn down, to modernize the neighborhood." "But the center is beloved," I exclaimed, appalled. "And historically protected. Surely, there are laws to prevent random demolition." Geraldine nodded. "Yes, but the protection isn't bulletproof. The building's official status is somewhat ambiguous, due to the municipality's shifting codes. Karen has been lobbying the local council to revoke what she calls outdated designations. She claims the center breeds clutter with all the events. Her words, not mine. I set my jaw determined. Well, she's about to meet stiff opposition. Geraldine's eyes glimmered with hope. "I'm so glad you're here, dear. With your connections and expertise, you might be just the ally this place needs." Little did I realize how far Karen would go to fulfill her vision of a pristine, uniform neighborhood, and how drastically her obsession with control would escalate into the realm of criminality. That evening, I told Dominic about the brewing conflict over the cultural center. He was as taken aback as I'd been. "Why destroy a place that fosters such a sense of community? It's heartless," he exclaimed. We shared a sense of foreboding, particularly because of the unsubtle remarks Karen had tossed our way since our arrival. She had already left little notes in our mailbox about minor matters, such as the color of our front door wreath. It must conform to neighborhood guidelines regarding seasonal decor, and the height of our lawn grass should not exceed 2.5 inches. Every note concluded with that same authoritative flourish. "Regards, B. Arkwood, HOA Chair." One Sunday morning, as we were tidying up our front yard, Karen appeared out of nowhere. In her usual rigid posture, she cleared her throat and raised an eyebrow. "Hello," she said stiffly. "I suppose you've heard about the proposed changes to the neighborhood's cultural cluster, as they call it." I forced a polite smile. "If you mean the Greenwood Hills Cultural Center, yes, I have. I'm actually quite involved there now." She pursed her lips. "It's come to our attention, mine and a majority of the HOA, that the center is a liability. It doesn't align with the streamlined aesthetic of the neighborhood. Furthermore, it's been known to attract large crowds, often from outside Greenwood Hills. That raises safety and noise concerns. That center is integral to the community," I replied, keeping my tone measured. "It's also historically significant. Part of the reason many people move here is to appreciate its cultural heritage. Surely the HOA can find a way to support it rather than demolish it." She sniffed. "I'm afraid it's more complicated than that. We've petitioned for an order to remove the building. It won't happen overnight, of course, but if I have any say, which I do, it'll be gone by next year. Mark my words." Before I could respond, Karen pointed to a set of planters on our porch. "By the way, your choice of flower pots isn't in line with the guidelines for uniform outdoor decor. Refer to Section B, subsection 6. I'll expect compliance by next weekend." Then, with that trademark turn of her heel, she marched away. I stared after her, incredulous. Part of me wanted to chase her down and demand an explanation for her destructive vendetta against the cultural center. But I also recognized that a direct confrontation would likely feed her sense of power. Instead, I decided we needed to fight in the proper arenas: legal, communal, and public opinion. Over the next few weeks, I attended HOA meetings, determined to rally support among the more reasonable board members and neighbors. Some seemed sympathetic, nodding with concern whenever I brought up the center's historical and cultural value. Yet fear of Karen's wrath lingered. Many residents looked uneasy, glancing at her for approval before daring to agree with me. She wielded influence by threatening code citations or fines over the smallest perceived infractions. Nonetheless, there were glimmers of hope. Several neighbors, especially those from diverse cultural backgrounds, stood firmly with me. Together, we began planning a series of events at the center: an international food festival, local art showcases, music performances from different ethnic traditions. The purpose was to reinforce how valuable the center was, and to underscore that the community wanted it to remain intact. Karen, of course, fumed and attempted to stop these events through official channels. But since the building was still under partial legal protection, she was forced to bide her time. Underneath the veneer of forced smiles, her hostility grew, culminating in a threat I overheard her hiss one evening. "That place will fall, whether you like it or not." As an international cultural ambassador, I had seen my share of conflict regarding historic sites and cultural expressions. Typically, I served as a mediator between local communities and governments, ensuring that precious cultural heritage remained protected. Little did I expect that in my own new neighborhood, I'd face a microcosm of the very battles I had fought overseas. Drawing upon my professional network, I invited journalists and fellow ambassadors from nearby regions to visit Greenwood Hills. I organized an open house at the cultural center, encouraging coverage in local newspapers, radio shows, and social media channels. The more attention we drew, I reasoned, the harder it would be for Karen to forcibly close the building. During that open house, several hundred visitors roamed the halls, admiring local paintings and listening to a children's choir sing songs from various cultures. The day ended with an outdoor performance of a West African drum circle, both lively and mesmerizing. Residents of Greenwood Hills crowded around, clapping and swaying to the pulsing rhythms. I even spotted some of the more ambivalent HOA board members tapping their feet, enthralled by the performance. Karen, however, stood at the edge of the gathering, arms crossed in disapproval. She repeatedly confronted Ms. Park and me, citing excessive noise and violation of local sound ordinances. When Ms. Park gently pointed out that we had an approved permit for the event, Karen's scowl only deepened. Later that evening, as we were packing up the festival banners, I overheard Karen speaking venomously to one of her close allies, a board member named Mr. Cartwright. "This is getting out of hand. I don't care how many foreigners or cultural ambassadors they bring in. The building's days are numbered. If I have to tear it down with my own two hands, I will." At those words, a chill settled over me. Her tone wasn't merely authoritarian. It was personal and full of contempt, especially regarding outsiders. As an ambassador who had dedicated my life to bridging cultural differences, I found her hostility disheartening, yet not entirely surprising. Prejudice often hides under the guise of property values and neighborhood standards. But in Greenwood Hills, I believe that open-mindedness would prevail. The coverage from our event reached local news outlets, and a piece ran in a regional magazine celebrating the charming diversity of Greenwood Hills, anchored by its historic cultural center. This publicity, though modest, was a win for our cause, raising awareness and drawing more supporters. Karen, incensed, began to dig into the building's code compliance history. She seized upon any maintenance or structural flaw, no matter how minor, to file complaints. Whenever she discovered a chipped windowsill or a scuffed patch of flooring, she summoned local inspectors, hoping they would deem the center unsafe. Geraldine Park and I worked tirelessly to address every official request, ensuring we met every safety code and municipal requirement. There were days I spent in my business attire, kneeling on the old wooden floors, sanding and repainting to rectify the slightest scuff. Each time the inspectors arrived, we cooperated fully. Each time, we passed, but just barely, thanks to Karen's relentless nitpicking. One early morning, as I was heading to a local cafe for a meeting, I nearly collided with a neighbor named Stella Nguyen, who looked frantic and out of breath. She clutched a folder stuffed with documents. "Have you heard?" she asked, eyes wide. About the new petition Karen pushed through at the council's zoning committee? I shook my head, concerned. No. What's happened? Stella looked around, ensuring no one else was in earshot. She's been quietly lobbying for an emergency vote to rescind the center's historical protection status, claiming it's a hazard. I've managed to get copies of some architectural reports they're using as evidence. It's all manipulated data, exaggerating minor cracks in the foundation. Exaggerations? I repeated, a wave of anger rising in my chest. Stella nodded. Yes, one of my relatives works at City Hall and saw the report. The data is misrepresented, making it appear as if the building is on the verge of collapse. If the council accepts it, they can override any heritage status. They'll put the building on the fast track for demolition. I felt my heart pound. When is this vote happening? Next Thursday, she whispered. Karen wanted it kept quiet so no one would mobilize in time. But I found out through my cousin. I thanked Stella profusely and rushed to inform Geraldine. Within hours, we pulled together an emergency meeting with a group of dedicated residents who cared deeply about the cultural center. They included local artists, history buffs, teachers, and even a few attorneys who specialized in heritage law. We decided we needed an immediate strategy to counter the misinformation. If the council recognized that Karen was submitting flawed data, they might postpone or dismiss her petition altogether. Over the next few days, our small task force worked around the clock, gathering legitimate structural assessments from professional engineers. We documented the center's stable foundation, well-maintained walls, and up-to-code wiring. Additionally, we prepared a comprehensive presentation showcasing the center's economic benefits, how events there had boosted local business, drawn tourism, and fostered a unique identity for Greenwood Hills. Karen, meanwhile, caught wind of our efforts. She confronted me in front of the post office one afternoon, her eyes flashing with indignation. You can't stop this, she snapped. Greenwood Hills has no place for rickety buildings that bring in a parade of strangers. My supporters know I'm doing what's best for property values. Destroying your neighborhood's cultural heart is hardly best for anyone, I replied, matching her gaze. She let out a derisive laugh. You think you can waltz in here with your fancy job title and your foreign connections and change our community? You're deluded. I've seen bigger fish like you fail at these battles. I always win. I refused to let her words rattle me. We'll see about that, I said calmly. Her face twisted, anger blazing behind her eyes, before she spun on her heels and stomped away. By then, I understood the depth of her resentment. It wasn't just about the building. Karen despised the very notion of cultural diversity, community gatherings, and anything that challenged her rigid vision of uniform lawns and perfectly matching shutters. The day of the council vote arrived like an ominous drumbeat. City Hall buzzed with activity, and the main chamber was packed with concerned residents. Karen and a handful of HOA supporters sat in the front row, quietly distributing copies of their suspect engineering report, which boasted dramatic photos of hairline cracks magnified to appear catastrophic. Moments before the vote, Geraldine and I presented our case. We displayed sworn statements from certified engineers, each attesting that the building was structurally sound. We reminded the council of the center's intangible cultural value, that intangible glue that bound Greenwood Hills together. Finally, we highlighted the positive economic and social impact of preserving a historical, vibrant space for community events. Council members listened intently, some nodding in agreement. Others seemed torn, flipping through the contradictory reports. Karen glared at me with open hostility each time I referenced the building's significance. When the time came for the council to cast their votes, the tension in the room was palpable. One by one, the members expressed their stance. Ultimately, we managed to secure a narrow majority in favor of delaying the vote, opting for an independent structural review rather than approving an immediate demolition order. It wasn't a definitive victory, but it was a crucial reprieve. The building remained protected, at least for now. Karen's face turned a deep shade of crimson as the council chair announced the decision to delay. She immediately rose from her seat, stormed to the microphone, and demanded to speak out of turn. "This is ridiculous," she exclaimed. "We have clear evidence that the building is unsafe, and you want to coddle these disruptive influences?" The council chair politely but firmly reminded her that the meeting protocols didn't allow for further commentary. Karen slammed her papers on the table, turned on her heel, and left in a flurry of indignation, nearly knocking over one of her own HOA allies in the process. Outside the chamber, reporters from local media interviewed me, Geraldine, and other supporters. I spoke about how the cultural center stood not just for old bricks and mortar, but as a beacon of unity among Greenwood Hills' diverse population. The coverage was generally favorable, and there was a sense of cautious optimism among the residents who loved the center. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's fury was about to reach a dangerous tipping point. Over the following weeks, I noticed she intensified her petty harassment, sending out more HOA letters, conducting sudden inspections of neighbors' properties, and threatening fines for the smallest perceived deviations from code. She also launched a smear campaign against me personally, whispering to neighbors that I was an elitist foreign sympathizer, determined to undermine Greenwood Hills' traditional values. Some gullible residents believed her, but many recognized her tactics for the fear-mongering they were. Meanwhile, I persisted in my role, both as a resident and an ambassador. I continued organizing cultural events, forging partnerships with local schools, and promoting inclusive projects through the center. Yet, behind my daily optimism, I held a growing unease. Karen's vindictiveness was like a coiled spring. The more resistance she faced, the more likely she was to lash out in a devastating manner. In the early hours of a dreary November morning, the phone rang on my bedside table. Dominic, bleary-eyed, picked up. The voice on the line was urgent. Mr. Levi, our neighbor, a retired jazz musician who lived just 3 houses away from us. He sounded panicked. "Get down to the cultural center immediately," he said. "Karen's there, with a demolition crew. They're saying they have an emergency permit to tear the place down." My heart lurched. "That's impossible. The council never authorized it." "Doesn't seem to matter," Mr. Levi replied, voice trembling. "They've got heavy machinery already. A bulldozer is rolling in." I threw on some clothes, rousing Dominic and the kids. I didn't want the children to see what might happen, but Ingrid insisted on coming. She'd volunteered at the center's kids' art workshop and felt deeply attached to the place. We dashed outside into the crisp morning air and sped to the cultural center. Even from several blocks away, I could hear the rumble of engines. When we arrived, the sight was shocking. A group of workers in fluorescent vests stood near a large yellow bulldozer parked ominously beside the center's eastern wall. Karen herself, clad in a pristine blazer, her ever-present HOA badge gleaming, paced back and forth, barking orders. She held a stack of papers, presumably the so-called emergency permit she had finagled. At her side was Mr. Cartwright, wearing a self-important smirk. A small crowd of residents had already formed, some holding protest signs, others tearfully pleading with the workers to stop. "This is illegal," a voice cried out from the throng. "The council never approved an emergency demolition." Karen swung around, brandishing her papers. "Oh, but they did," she sneered. "I have a signed document here that states the building is condemned effective immediately, and we're free to proceed." My gut told me this was a sham. Possibly forged papers or a last-minute maneuver orchestrated by Karen and a corrupt ally in the zoning office. Regardless, the workers seemed uncertain, scanning the crowd's anger with a measure of caution. "It's not safe to proceed," I said loudly, stepping forward. "I'm in touch with the municipal office. Nobody authorized an emergency teardown. You're risking legal action if you continue." Karen's eyes blazed. "You think you can stop me, Ambassador?" She spat the last word with venomous sarcasm. "I'm doing this neighborhood a favor. Enough with the old junk. Time for progress. Time for uniformity and real value in Greenwood Hills." With that, she gestured to the bulldozer operator, who revved the engine. The crowd gasped. I rushed toward the massive machine, raising my arms to signal the driver to halt. Several other residents did the same, forming a human barricade. The operator hesitated, seemingly uncomfortable ramming through a line of distraught neighbors. Karen, furious, screamed, "Get out of the way! Move!" She stomped forward, grabbing a protest sign from a teenager's hands and throwing it aside. "You're all trespassing on a site that's about to be demolished. I will call the police." A tense standoff followed. The bulldozer's engine rumbled, the crowd shouted back, and for a moment it seemed the situation might spiral into violence. Then, a new sound pierced the air, the wail of sirens. Police cars pulled up, lights flashing. An official municipal vehicle followed. Out stepped 2 officers and a city official in a Navy suit. The official marched straight to the bulldozer, ordering the driver to shut it down. Then he turned to Karen, his voice booming. "On whose authority are you conducting this demolition?" Karen thrust her bundle of papers forward. "I have a signed permit for emergency demolition," she insisted. The official took one look at the documents, eyes narrowing. "This isn't legitimate," he said firmly. "There's no record of such an order in our system. Where did you get this?" At that moment, Karen's face lost its usual color. She stammered, I was told by the council by." But the official shook his head. "The council never approved an emergency demolition. The building is still under review. This document is fake." A wave of relief swept through the crowd. People began to cheer, though they were still reeling from the close call. The police stepped forward, asking more questions. Karen tried to talk her way out of it, pointing to Mr. Cartwright and shifting blame. But the damage was done. She had been caught leading an illegal demolition attempt. Before the police could fully disperse the crowd and secure the site, chaos erupted. A figure darted from behind the bulldozer. It was Mr. Cartwright, rummaging in the machine's cab, apparently attempting to manipulate the controls. Whether he aimed to take matters into his own hands or was simply panicking, I'll never know. But in his frantic fumbling, the bulldozer roared to life and lurched forward a few feet. Debris scraped along the building's exterior with a jarring screech, splintering wooden beams. People screamed, scattering. Police officers rushed to the machine, yanking Cartwright away from the controls. Karen, in an instant, changed her stance from belligerent authority to feigned ignorance. "I had nothing to do with that," she exclaimed, hands held up as if she, too, were a victim. Dust filled the air. The building's corner was marred with deep gouges, a portion of the facade partially caved in. Miss Park, who had carefully preserved the cultural center for decades, collapsed to her knees in tears. I rushed inside the building with 2 other residents, ignoring the chaos outside. We wanted to check for any structural compromise. A few cracks had widened, and rubble littered the floor near the east wall. Dust motes swirled in the beams of morning light. Miraculously, the damage, while significant, wasn't enough to bring the entire building down. But it was a horrifying reminder of how quickly Karen's recklessness could translate into real destruction. Outside, the police and city official pressed Karen for answers. She refused to admit wrongdoing, insisting she was only responding to urgent concerns about safety. Meanwhile, Cartwright sat on the curb in handcuffs, hunched over in defeat. The crowd seethed with anger. Some demanded Karen's immediate arrest. Others simply wept at the sight of the beloved center's battered facade. Ultimately, the police escorted Karen away for more questioning. She wasn't formally arrested that day, but the official confiscated her dubious documents and assured the crowd that an investigation would follow. The machine operators, once the site was deemed secure, drove the bulldozer back onto the transport trailer, their expressions a mix of relief and guilt. They'd nearly committed a catastrophic act under Karen's direction. As we dispersed, I comforted Ms. Park, who was shaking with sorrow. "We'll rebuild," I promised her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "We'll ensure this center stands stronger than ever." She nodded weakly, tears staining her cheeks. "I've never seen the neighborhood so shaken," she whispered. "I've never seen so much anger and hatred come to life here." I felt that anger, too, swirling inside me like a rising tide. But also, a renewed determination to see Karen held accountable. I was done playing polite. This was no longer a matter of simple differences or petty code citations. Karen and her accomplices had nearly destroyed an irreplaceable gem of Greenwood Hills. It was time for the full weight of the law to bear down on them. That evening, the entire neighborhood was abuzz. Social media groups lit up with posts about Karen's attempt to demolish the cultural center under false pretenses. Dozens of photos showed the bulldozer, the damage to the building, and the tear-streaked faces of longtime residents. Furious commentary flooded in from around the region. Words like criminal, vandal, and tyrant were hurled at Karen. Many demanded she step down from the HOA. Others called for her immediate incarceration. Greenwood Hills local television news aired a feature segment. The anchor recounted the day's events, painting Karen as a rogue HOA chair who used forged documents to attempt an illegal demolition. Then came footage of me and Geraldine Park explaining the building's significance, emphasizing how close we came to losing a century of cultural heritage in mere moments of recklessness. It was a damning portrait of Karen's twisted vendetta, and it ignited a storm of public outrage. The next day, the city council convened an emergency session. I testified alongside multiple witnesses who had been at the site. Even the bulldozer operator admitted he was hired through a last-minute contract, arranged by HOA leadership, that refused to wait for official clearance. The municipal official who confronted Karen at the scene produced the forged demolition permit, pointing out glaring errors. The signature was from a council member who had been out of the country that week. The date was formatted incorrectly. The seal was a cheap photocopy. By the time the session concluded, the council voted unanimously to open a formal inquiry into Karen's actions. I also learned that Ms. Park had filed a criminal complaint, accusing Karen of fraud, conspiracy to commit property damage, and reckless endangerment. Many neighbors followed suit with civil suits for the emotional distress caused. Even the city itself prepared to press charges for forging official documents. Karen's usual bravado disappeared. She stopped showing up at official meetings. Through whispered accounts, we learned she was hiding in her house on Hickory Lane, blinds drawn, ignoring phone calls. Meanwhile, the HOA board quickly distanced itself from her. A few members resigned outright, unwilling to be associated with her meltdown. For the next 2 weeks, rumors circulated that Karen might try to flee or rally some last-ditch attempt to sabotage the center again. The city installed temporary fencing and 24/7 security around the building to ensure no further tampering occurred. I spent my days helping Ms. Park with necessary repairs, boarding up the damaged section, hiring structural engineers to confirm the building's integrity, and planning a fundraising campaign for the full restoration. As an international cultural ambassador, I called upon colleagues in heritage preservation. Within a few days, we received donations and volunteer offers from philanthropic foundations and fellow ambassadors who had heard of the incident. They recognized that the Greenwood Hills Cultural Center wasn't just a local treasure. It was a microcosm of cultural unity worthy of saving. At the same time, news outlets began picking up the story from across the state. Some national media even expressed interest. Power-hungry HOA chair tries to illegally demolish historic cultural center. The sense of scandal deepened when details emerged about Karen's anti-diversity sentiments, gleaned from interviews with neighbors and from minutes of past meetings in which she'd voiced shockingly insensitive views. All this attention eventually forced law enforcement's hand. One brisk morning, police squad cars lined up in front of Karen's tidy ranch home. She'd grown so paranoid that, according to neighbors, she rarely left the property. But now, there was no escaping the consequences. The district attorney had filed charges, including criminal mischief, fraud, and reckless endangerment. The officers knocked on her door, presumably gave her a chance to surrender, and then let her out in handcuffs. It was a surreal sight. The once haughty, impeccably dressed woman, who had lorded over everyone, now shuffled down her front steps in sweatpants, her face twisted in a mixture of rage and humiliation. She yelled, "You can't do this to me. I run this place." But no one took her words seriously. A crowd gathered, some filming with their phones, others simply watching with stunned awe. I stood at a distance, my heart heavy. Though her downfall was well-earned, a part of me lamented the bitterness that had consumed her. The damage she inflicted was real, but so was the damage she had done to herself. The weeks leading up to Karen's trial were rife with discovery hearings, depositions, and mounting evidence of her misconduct. Documents exposed a tangled web of unethical behavior. Not only had she forged the demolition permit, but she'd pressured certain HOA members to file false reports against the cultural center, claiming it was a hub of criminal activity. Additionally, attorneys uncovered shocking emails between Karen and Mr. Cartwright. They openly discussed ways to circumvent the city's heritage protection laws, plotting sabotage like turning off the center's electricity, tampering with the heating system in winter, and even orchestrating an accidental flood by damaging the plumbing. The correspondence revealed a chilling disregard for the law and for community safety. At trial, the prosecution presented evidence in a neat timeline. They began with the day Karen first proposed demolishing the building under the pretense of beautification and ended with her attempt to forcibly tear it down using the bulldozer. Witness after witness, residents, city officials, even her fellow board members, took the stand, testifying to her aggressive intimidation tactics. Ms. Park's emotional testimony described how Karen's vendetta had reached a point of near calamity. When she recounted the building's partial collapse that day, more than one juror's eyes welled with tears. Karen's defense team tried to paint her as a misunderstood community leader. They argued that her actions were misguided attempts to improve neighborhood safety, referencing minor structural problems. But cross-examination demolished that narrative. Professional engineers countered with thorough reports confirming the building's overall soundness. The prosecution hammered home that forging permits, hiring a demolition crew under false pretenses, and nearly harming innocent bystanders was far beyond any misunderstood cause. I was also called to testify, representing the perspective of someone who had worked globally to preserve cultural sites. The court allowed me to speak on the building's cultural importance, as well as on the immediate dangers posed by the unauthorized bulldozer operation. I kept my tone factual, but my passion for heritage preservation was undeniable. "It's not just an old building," I said into the microphone. "It's a cherished gathering place representing centuries of cultural contributions. Destroying it would erase both the past and future potential for unity." Karen sat across the room, expression pinched, refusing to meet my gaze. At one point, she erupted in frustration, shouting, "This is a witch hunt. They've all conspired against me." The judge swiftly admonished her for outbursts. After several days of testimony, the jury deliberated. The mood in Greenwood Hills was tense, as if everyone was holding their breath. Eventually, the verdict came down: guilty on multiple counts, including forgery, criminal mischief, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to commit property damage. Karen's face crumpled. She tried to maintain composure, but tears escaped the corners of her eyes. Perhaps she finally grasped the gravity of her misdeeds. The judge scheduled her sentencing for a month later, but the consensus among the legal experts was that she faced a significant prison term. The notion of a once powerful HOA chair going to jail rippled through the community like a cautionary tale. When sentencing day arrived, Dominic and I sat among other neighbors in the courthouse gallery. Karen appeared in a somber suit, her hair pinned back in an uncharacteristically plain style. Gone was the haughty posture, her shoulders sagged. Even so, traces of her old arrogance flickered in her eyes whenever she glanced around. The judge delivered a stern address, condemning Karen's reckless disregard for public safety, her manipulation of local governance, and her attempts to sabotage a cultural icon. He cited the potential for massive harm if the partial demolition had proceeded. People could have been injured or killed, and invaluable historical artifacts could have been destroyed. In the end, Karen was sentenced to several years in state prison. Additionally, the court ruled that she owed hefty restitution fees to the city for the emergency response, to the cultural center for repairs, and to neighbors who'd suffered emotional or financial harm. As if that weren't enough, the judge approved measures allowing the seizure of Karen's home to help cover those costs. Her property was to be confiscated and sold at auction. The finality of the ruling resonated through the silent courtroom. Karen's lips parted in shock. She trembled violently, then slumped forward, as though drained of all fight. She was led away by bailiffs, her eyes searching the room for a sympathetic face. None met her gaze with compassion. Outside, a swarm of reporters gathered, cameras clicking and lights flashing. A few tried to question me, but I merely said, "Justice has prevailed. Now our community can heal and move forward together." I truly believed it. The entire ordeal had been painful, but Greenwood Hills would no longer be under the reign of a tyrannical HOA chair. In the days that followed, the HOA underwent a drastic reorganization. Karen's closest allies either resigned or were voted out. A new board, emphasizing transparency and inclusivity, took shape. One of its first acts was to sign a formal pledge to protect the Greenwood Hills Cultural Center and collaborate with local historians, architects, and cultural ambassadors, like me, to preserve the site in perpetuity. Meanwhile, Ms. Park supervised repairs, bolstered by donations and grants from around the world. The battered eastern wall was rebuilt with fresh materials, while maintaining the building's historic character. Volunteers from near and far arrived to help patch, repaint, and restore the gorgeous murals inside. An outpouring of local talent offered to host benefit concerts, art auctions, and craft fairs. The cultural center soon flourished with renewed vitality, no longer overshadowed by Karen's looming threats. Several months later, Greenwood Hills hosted a grand reopening celebration for the restored cultural center. The building, resplendent with new windows and a polished facade, was adorned in colorful banners. Musicians played lively tunes on the front steps, while inside, local artisans showcased paintings, pottery, and handmade crafts that reflected the diverse backgrounds of our neighbors. Dominic, Ingrid, Felix, and I arrived early to help set up. My children giggled as they ran around with bright balloons, marveling at how a place once nearly wrecked now stood more beautiful than ever. A commemorative plaque was unveiled, honoring the many residents and supporters who had contributed to saving this important piece of Greenwood Hills heritage. My own name appeared on the list, as did Ms. Parks and Stellan Wens, among many others. As the festivities began, I took a moment to stand at the center of the main hall, gazing up at a new stained glass window that depicted a tapestry of symbols from various world cultures, and homage to the building's mission to foster unity. I felt the familiar swell of gratitude that I usually experienced on my diplomatic missions abroad. This was proof that an engaged community, fighting for a just cause, can triumph even over those who wield power for selfish ends. People danced, sang, and sampled an array of international dishes set up on long tables. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement, no longer weighed down by hidden tensions or whispered fears. For a moment, I thought of Karen, once so omnipresent, now relegated to a cautionary footnote in the town's history. She faced her punishment behind bars, her house gone, her old identity as the all-powerful HOA Queen shattered. The community, on the other hand, had grown stronger, forging a shared purpose to protect and celebrate its cultural legacy. Late into the evening, after the music had wound down and families began drifting home, I strolled through the newly repaired corridors. I passed the framed photos of old Greenwood Hills, the recorded stories of immigrants who had laid the foundations for this vibrant town. In the hush of the building, I marveled at how close we had come to losing it all. Never again, I whispered to the silent halls. Not here, not anywhere. The Greenwood Hills Cultural Center has since become a regional sensation, frequently featured in travel guides and local TV segments about preserving cultural heritage. Schools schedule field trips to explore its exhibits, local businesses partner on events, and families flock to its seasonal festivals. Though the memory of Karen's rampage lingers, it serves as a powerful reminder. A single individual, drunk on power, can cause havoc, but a united community can and will stand against such tyranny. In the aftermath, other HOAs across the region took heed, adopting policies that emphasize community building rather than petty rule enforcement. Among Greenwood Hills neighbors, there's a newfound sense of pride. The center's journey from near destruction to triumphant revival symbolizes the best of what people can achieve when they embrace diversity, cherish history, and refuse to be intimidated by those who would force everything into a narrow mold. As for me, I continue my work around the globe, but Greenwood Hills will always be my cherished home base, proof that diplomatic skills aren't just for international negotiations. They're invaluable in our very own neighborhoods. After all, culture isn't something that exists only in distant lands. It blossoms in every town, every community center, and every gathering of neighbors willing to share a meal, a story, or a song. Yes, Karen got the punishment she deserved: jail time, property confiscation, the total loss of her ill-used influence. But in a paradoxical way, she also bestowed an unintended gift upon Greenwood Hills, the impetus to band together, reclaim its heritage, and shine even brighter than before. And thus, the Greenwood Hills Cultural Center stands tall, a proud testament to the power of unity in the face of ignorance and hate. It remains a living, breathing symbol of hope, reminding us every day that when we fight to preserve the best parts of our collective past, we pave the way for a brilliant, inclusive future.